Calling case number 16058-918, People of the State of Michigan versus Charles Andre Pugh. Mr. Pugh is charged with count 1, criminal sexual conduct, first degree with multiple variables, with a SOR notice and HIV STD testing notice. It is a felony. Penalty, life with mandatory lifetime electronic monitoring and mandatory AIDS and STD testing and DNA to be taken upon arrest. Count 2, criminal sexual conduct, first degree with multiple variables, with a SOR notice, HIV STD testing notice. It is a felony. Penalty, life with mandatory lifetime electronic monitoring and mandatory AIDS and STD testing, DNA to be taken upon arrest. Count 3, criminal sexual conduct, first degree with multiple variables, with a SOR notice and HIV STD testing notice. It is a felony. Penalty, life with mandatory lifetime electronic monitoring, mandatory AIDS and STD testing, DNA to be taken upon arrest. Count 4, criminal sexual conduct, third degree, person between the ages of 13 to 15 years old, with a SOR notice and HIV STD testing notice. It is a felony. Penalty, 15 years with mandatory AIDS and STD testing. Count 5, criminal sexual conduct, third degree, person between the ages of 13 and 15 years old, with a SOR notice and HIV STD testing notice. It is a felony. Penalty, 15 years with mandatory AIDS and STD testing. Count 6, criminal sexual conduct, third degree, person between the ages of 13 to 15 years old, with a SOR notice and HIV STD testing notice. It is a felony. Penalty, 15 years with mandatory AIDS and STD testing. Sir, state your name for the record, please. And you heard the charges that were read and the penalty that you could receive on this case. I'm sorry, sir, did you hear the charges that were read, sir?
Yes, sir.
And the penalty that you could receive on this case, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and also on behalf of the people?
Danielle Bennett on behalf of the people. Good morning, Judge.
Okay.
And
Okay, we're going to do the pretrial dates yet. First, court is going to enter a not guilty plea on your behalf. There is a probable cause conference scheduled for July 19, 2016 at 8:30 a.m. at the Third Circuit Court, followed by a preliminary examination date July 26, 2016 at 8:30 a.m. at the Third Circuit Court, Frank Murphy Hall of Justice. With any felony matter, you do have the right to remain silent. Anything that you say orally or in writing can and will be used against you in a court of law. You also have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one on your own, the court will appoint one for you at public expense. Do you understand your right, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And as to bond on behalf of the people?
Thank you, Judge. As the court's aware, under MCR 6.106B1B, the court has discretion in this case specifically because there are charges of CSE first degree to deny bond altogether if the court makes two findings. First, that there's a presumption, great presumption rather, of guilt. Obviously, the court's not aware of any facts in this case, and we will not be outlining any facts in this case right now, other than the fact that you're aware in CSE cases, the victim's testimony does not need to be corroborated, so I'll leave the court with that. But there's also the portion that states, unless the court finds that Mr. Pugh, the defendant, is not likely to present as a flight risk. I think that's really where the court is going to have some pause, some concern. That's part and parcel of the conditions that are outlined in 6.106F, B through I. Record of non-appearance at court proceedings, flight to avoid prosecution, ties to the community, seriousness of the charges, likelihood of conviction, likelihood of sentence. All 6 of these charges carry mandatory prison guidelines. If Mr. Pugh is convicted of even one of these, it would require mandatory incarceration in the Michigan Department of Corrections. But I really think the biggest issue here is really Mr. Pugh's actions alone as far as being a flight risk. I think any strong argument he had as to ties to the community no longer exists. They existed 3 years ago, Judge. There's no other way to say it. It was a secretive departure from the state of Michigan when he left 3 years ago. Never to return. The ties he had, his position on city council, residence, employment, family, friends. He was tied to this city. Those ties did not keep him here 3 years ago. Nor did Mr. Pugh return to the state of Michigan when he had a pending civil case against him. And it was Mr. Pugh's own words in a deposition regarding him leaving the state of Michigan that he left because he was embarrassed. That the city and the country was about to find out what had happened, and he was concerned about embarrassment. So I think the stakes are so much higher than any damage to reputation at this point. He's looking at mandatory incarceration. He's looking at possible mandatory registration as a sex offender. I think that the court cannot be given any assurances given about it, his ties are to New York now. They are not to the state of Michigan. He's not employed here. He does not have a residence here. His ties are to the state of New York. So we asked the court to actually exercise your discretion and deny bond altogether. And in the alternative, we'd ask that you set a high cash bond with no 10% provision, conditions that he forfeit passport, driver's license. Give this court some assurance that Mr. Pugh will return for his next court date. I think if the court was to set a cash bond somewhere in the area of $500,000 to $750,000 with no 10% provision would be appropriate, given the history that Mr. Pugh has with leaving the state. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you. Mr. Elizondo, anything further on behalf of the people? Okay, stand by.
Indicated that he was staying at this location, but he didn't know the address in West Bloomfield. He then further stated he would be staying with his stepmother, Sonia Pugh, who does have a local phone number. If he leaves the state, if he were to leave the state and go back to New York or whatever, tether wouldn't be an option of any kind. Yeah, no, obviously. Yeah.
All right. On behalf of the people, the court appreciates the information you placed on the record. In addition to the nature of the charges and the seriousness of the allegations, court is also taking into account the people's representations on the record with regard to their position on bond at this time. Court will set bond in the amount of $500,000. Cash surety